at Trump's big January the 6th rally just before the attack on the Capitol. The January 6th investigation has described Eastman as a, quote, central player in the development of a legal strategy to justify a coup. Now, Eastman infamously wrote that 2 memos for President Trump outlining what he described as a legal path for Vice President Mike Pence to toss out electoral votes from several states that Joe Biden had won and thereby handing the 2020 election to Trump. Eastman and Trump both repeatedly pressured Mike Pence to follow these plans, to toss out those electoral votes when it came time for him to preside over the certification of the election on January the 6th. And of course, Pence, as we know, did not bow to the pressure campaign. The January 6th investigation naturally had a lot of questions for John Eastman. But when they subpoenaed him, Eastman pled the fifth. He asserted his right not to incriminate himself under questioning. Politico called it, quote, an extraordinary assertion by someone who worked closely with Trump to attempt to overturn the 2020 election results. Now, unable to get his testimony, as you can imagine, the January 6th investigation subpoenaed John Eastman's records. More importantly, his emails from his time working with Trump to overturn the election. Mr. Eastman has been trying to block the investigation from getting those emails, claiming that he was acting as Donald Trump's attorney and therefore his emails are protected by attorney-client privilege. Now, here is where things actually get interesting. Tonight, the January 6th investigation has filed a motion in court making its case for why those emails are actually not protected by attorney-client privilege. And what they are saying is that the attorney-client privilege is void if what the lawyer and the client are communicating about is doing something illegal or fraudulent. Under the law, you and your lawyer can't just simply plan something illegal and then claim attorney-client privilege to shield all the evidence of that crime. And the January 6th investigation is now saying to the judge tonight, we believe Donald Trump and his lawyer, John Eastman, were engaged in crimes. Let me read some of it for you. This is from tonight's filing for the January 6th investigation. Evidence and information available to the committee establishes a good faith belief that Mr. Trump and others may have engaged in criminal and or fraudulent acts, and that plaintiff's legal assistance was used in furtherance of those activities. The president sought to use the vice president to manipulate the results in his favor. Had this effort succeeded, the electoral count would have been obstructed, impeded, influenced, and at the very least, delayed, all without any genuine legal justification and based on the false pretense that the election had been stolen. There is no genuine question that the president and plaintiff attempted to accomplish this specific illegal result. The Select Committee also has a good faith basis for concluding that the president and members of his campaign engaged in a criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States by interfering with the election certification process, disseminating false information about election fraud and pressuring state officials to alter state election results and federal officials to assist in that effort. The conspirators also obstructed a lawful government function by pressuring the vice president to violate his duty to count the electoral certificates presented from certain states. The apparent objective of these efforts was to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election and declare Donald Trump the winner. In this way, the conspiracy aimed to obstruct and interfere with the proper functioning of the United States government. So again, tonight, let's be clear about this. The January 6th investigation has gone to court to say that Donald Trump's lawyer can't claim attorney-client privilege for his communications because he and Trump and others on Trump's campaign were engaged in crimes. Joining us now is former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, Barbara McQuaid. Last week, she published what she called a model prosecution memo analyzing actual potential charges against Donald Trump for his scheme to pressure Mike Pence to overturn the election. And incredibly, the 2 crimes that she thought may have been committed are the 2 crimes the January 6th investigation names in this filing tonight: conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding. Barbs, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. As the person who kind of, I'm using this word here, predicted that these might be the statutes that Trump violated, what's your reaction to this filing tonight and how significant is it?
Well, I think it's a very significant filing because it's the first time the committee has said out loud what the crimes may have been and pulled together the evidence of what that crime may have looked like. I think that any prosecutor who looked at that evidence in the way I did and the way that the former prosecutors who are leading this investigation for the January 6th committee are doing, it really jumps out as fairly obvious potential crimes. Now, of course, the details of the evidence matters here, but one of the things they do in this filing that I think is so significant is they document all of the evidence that they have that is beginning to come into focus that they've been gathering from all of these sources. We know that because of some public statements that Donald Trump was pressuring Mike Pence to refuse to certify the election. But I think some of the things that are coming into view are the hard part, which is showing that Donald Trump knew that it was false to say that he had that he had won the election. And they document and list all of that evidence in this filing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you can lay that out for us a little bit. The investigation has told the federal court it has a good faith reason to believe Trump, Eastman, and others have committed federal crimes. Explain for us the case they lay out, and do you think at this point it is a convincing one?
I do. For either of these crimes, obstruction of an official proceeding or conspiracy to defraud the United States, each has slightly different elements. But I think the key factor that has always appeared maybe elusive is proving Donald Trump's intent, that he knew that what he was saying was fraudulent. When he was telling Mike Pence you should change the outcome of the election, that he knew that was based on a lie and based on fraud. And so they document all the ways that he knew that this was false. Number one, his own cybersecurity chief at the Department of Homeland Security said so publicly. William Barr, his attorney general, said so publicly. The director of the Office of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, his appointee, said so publicly. Barr's successors at the Justice Department told him repeatedly there was no fraud. He had an internal campaign memo for the Trump campaign that concluded there was no fraud. And 61 out of 62 judges in all the court cases that were filed across the country found that there was no fraud. The one case that the Trump campaign won was on an unrelated issue relating to affidavits. And so all of that evidence mounts to suggest that Donald Trump absolutely knew that there was no fraud here. In fact, one judge said there was not a scintilla of evidence that there is fraud. You know, it's like, Eamon, it's like there's an instruction that juries get about willful blindness. Yeah. You can't turn a blind eye to something when it's highly probable that it's true. If someone tells you that the world is round, you can't say the world is flat in the face of repeated evidence that it is round. If scientists tell you and they show you photos and you continue to persist that the world is flat, at some point a jury will believe that you're lying.
Yeah, and at the point, I guess the point you're making is that you can't just plead stupidity and ignorance and saying, I didn't know, despite the overwhelming evidence that was presented to you.
And Richard, as full-throated as President Biden has been in asking for support for the Ukrainian people, and you definitely saw a bipartisan show of that tonight, and as insistent as he has been that U.S. troops will defend NATO, but we will not put U.S. boots on the ground inside Ukraine, which is an ally but not a NATO ally. He's also been able to lead the world in a unified Western response that has put in very strong sanctions. And tonight, he did talk about upping those in a way that got bipartisan cheers on the floor of the House chamber. He talked about moving on from freezing assets to seizing assets, including going after, as he described it, the yachts and the luxury apartments and the private planes of the oligarchs. We're coming for you. He said he ad-libbed a line. He said that Putin,
I heard that.
Talking about you have no idea what's coming. Why will that matter? Why could that make a difference in terms of Russian behavior, or could it?
Oh, it would make an enormous difference, because Vladimir Putin, the way he is farmed out his money is he holds it through different oligarchs. There are many different oligarchs who hold money for Putin and his family personally. And generally, they park it outside of the country. That is, in many ways, Russia's Achilles heel in all of this. It is also its logistical problems that it's having on its military, the fact that it relies on very old-fashioned siege warfare. But its biggest weakness is that the Russians don't keep their money in their own country. They keep it in the West, and they generally keep it through friendly oligarchs. And Putin can call on those oligarchs to move the money, to give it back to him, to disperse with it as he pleases. So if suddenly now governments like the United States, like Switzerland, like Monaco, like the United Kingdom suddenly start seizing hotels, football teams, yachts, homes, it will send the oligarchs running. It will send them scared. It will hurt Putin personally. It could enrage him, and we could have a situation here where you have a wounded animal, and a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. But it will have it will certainly get the attention of the most powerful people in Russia by hitting them where it hurts.
NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel live from Kyiv tonight as dawn breaks. Richard, thank you again for joining us, my friend. Joining us now live from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv is NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel. Richard, thank you for being here. When we spoke this time last night, we were looking with considerable trepidation at that miles-long convoy of hundreds of Russian military vehicles outside of Kyiv. Today, it does not seem to have moved. What do we know about the Russian battle plan here? What is going on with the speed and the scope of their advance?
So it has been plagued with logistical problems. And this convoy, which actually began when it crossed from Belarus and has built strength since then, has been slow from the start. It had trouble moving over some terrain. It had trouble crossing a tributary.